A lonely farm swallowed by silence where a woman's only company is her cat and the ghosts of her past. Then one night, 3 bobcats, wild animals with eyes like fire, show up in her barn. They're not hunting, they're not threatening, they're waiting. What could these predators want with a broken-down farm and a woman who's given up on hope? This isn't just a story. It's a heartwarming mystery that'll make you question everything you know about wildlife. From a daring rescue to a reunion that defies time, these bobcats didn't just find shelter, they changed a life. How far would you go to protect a stranger, even one with claws? Stick around to uncover the inexplicable bond that turned a farm into sacred ground. If this grabs you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that'll tug at your heart. Martha's world was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that creeps into your bones and makes you feel older than you are. Her days blurred together on the farm, where the wind whispered through empty fields and the old barn stood like a ghost of better times. She'd lost her husband to illness, her son to the pull of a life beyond these hills. All she had was the creak of the porch swing and her cat, Shadow, curling up by her feet. But lately, even that felt hollow. One night, a sound sliced through the stillness, low, guttural, almost mournful. Martha froze, her coffee mug trembling in her hands. It came from the barn. Flashbacks hit her husband fixing fences, her son chasing fireflies. The barn hadn't hummed with life in years. Heart pounding, she grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the cold. The beam caught 3 pairs of eyes glowing in the dark. Bobcats, wild animals, lean and ragged, staring back. They didn't growl or bolt. They just watched. Her first instinct was to shoo them off. Bobcats weren't pets, they were wildlife, solitary and untamed. But something stopped her. Unlimped, its paw held gingerly above the dirt. Another stood guard over a smaller one, its ribs sharp under matted fur. They looked as tired as she felt. "Y'all don't belong here," she muttered, but her voice softened. She backed away, leaving the barn door cracked. The next night they were back. Martha couldn't explain why she left scraps by the door, leftover chicken, a bowl of milk. It wasn't a rescue, not yet. Just a small act, like tossing a pebble into a still pond. She didn't dare get close, but from her kitchen window she saw them eat. The limping one glanced her way, its eyes catching the moonlight. A heartwarming flicker stirred in her chest, unfamiliar and fragile. Days turned into weeks. The bobcats kept their distance, but their presence filled the silence with something new. Martha found herself lingering by the barn, listening for their soft steps. One evening, as she set out food, a shadow moved closer than ever before. Her breath caught. Was this trust or something wilder? Winter clamped down hard, turning the fields to brittle glass underfoot. Martha's breath puffed in the air as she trudged to the barn, her boots crunching through frost. The bobcats hadn't left. Those wild animals, once just shadows in the night, now lingered like a quiet promise. They didn't beg or approach, just watched her from the barn's dim corners, their eyes glinting with something she couldn't name. It wasn't friendship, but it felt like the start of a story she didn't yet understand. She kept leaving food, scraps at first, then bits of meat she'd cooked just for them. "Don't go getting used to this," she'd grumble, but her heart wasn't in it. The limping one moved better now, and the smallest bobcat's ribs weren't so sharp. Martha started talking to them, her voice filling the barn's hollow spaces. "Cold out there, ain't it?" she'd say, not expecting an answer. It was just good to hear herself again, like waking up from a long sleep. One morning the wind howled and snow piled high against the barn door. Martha found the biggest bobcat curled up under a pile of straw, half buried in white. Its breath was shallow, its fur dusted with ice. Without thinking, she grabbed an old quilt from the house and draped it over the creature. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from the weight of caring for something wild. That night, she dreamed of her son, his laughter echoing through fields she hadn't seen in years. She woke with tears, heartwarming and raw. The Bobcats stayed closer now. They never crossed into her house, loyal to their invisible line. But when Martha approached, they didn't scatter. One evening, the smallest one brushed past her leg, quick as a whisper. Her heart leapt. Was this trust or just survival? She didn't know, but the barn felt less empty, like it held a secret only they shared. Then came the storm. Thunder rattled the windows, and the world outside turned to chaos. Martha woke to an eerie quiet, the kind that makes your skin prickle. She glanced out the window and froze. The Bobcats weren't in the barn. They stood on her porch, staring into the dark, as if calling her to follow. Where were they leading her? The storms tore through the valley like a warning, ripping branches and sending rivers over their banks. Martha's farm felt like it was holding its breath. The Bobcats, those wild animals that had woven themselves into her quiet life, seemed restless too. They paced the barn, their eyes catching the flicker of lightning through the slats. Martha watched them from her kitchen, a knot tightening in her chest. Something was shifting, not just the weather, but something deeper, like the earth itself was trying to speak. One morning, after a night of howling winds, Martha stepped outside to survey the damage. Her fence post was charred, split by a lightning strike. She cursed under her breath, then stopped cold. The Bobcats weren't in the barn. They sat on her porch, three silhouettes against the grey dawn, staring toward the forest. The smallest one let out a low, urgent mewl, its gaze fixed on the trees. "What's got you spooked?" Martha muttered, but her feet were already moving, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. She followed them, her boots sinking into the mud. The forest hummed with a strange energy, dripping leaves, distant birds falling silent. The Bobcats led her to a clearing where a fawn lay trapped in a mire, its legs thrashing weakly. Its eyes were wide with panic. Martha's heart lurched. Without thinking, she waded in, her hands slipping in the muck as she pulled the creature free. The fawn staggered to its feet, then bolted into the trees. The Bobcats watched, still as statues. That night, Martha couldn't sleep. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive, like a heartbeat. She thought of the fawn, of the Bobcats leading her to that rescue. Was this their story, or hers? The farm felt different now, as if the land itself had stitched her to those wild animals in a heartwarming thread she couldn't unravel. She lit a candle, whispering a thanks to whatever force had guided her. Dawn brought a new sound, a low rumble, faint but growing. Martha stepped onto the porch, her coffee forgotten. A dust cloud rose on the horizon, and her breath caught. A truck was coming up the road, one she hadn't seen in years. Who was it, and why now? The truck's rumble grew louder, kicking up dust that swirled like memories in the morning light. Martha stood frozen on the porch, her hands gripping the railing. The Bobcats, those wild animals that had become her silent companions, sat nearby, their eyes tracking the vehicle. Her heart thumped hard, like it knew something she didn't. When the truck stopped and the door creaked open, a man stepped out, taller, weathered, but unmistakable. Eli, her son, was home. "I had a feeling I needed to come back," he said, his voice rough but soft. Martha's eyes stung, but words stuck in her throat. Years of silence hung between them, heavy as the storms that had just passed. They hugged, brief but fierce, and stepped inside. Eli noticed the change in her, her shoulders less slumped, her gaze brighter. "You seem different, Ma," he said, glancing around the house. She just smiled, a heartwarming warmth spreading through her. The Bobcat's story had changed her, though she couldn't explain how. That night, Eli woke to a strange sound, low, rhythmic, like a pulse outside. He peered through the window and froze. The three Bobcats sat on the fence, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlit fields. They weren't pacing or hunting, just watching the house, like sentinels guarding something sacred. "What the hell?" he whispered, rubbing his eyes. He found Martha in the kitchen, staring at her coffee. "Those cats, they still here?" he asked. She looked up, her eyes distant but calm. They never left Eli. They sat together, words coming slow but steady. Eli spoke of his years away, jobs that didn't last, roads that led nowhere. Martha listened, her heart stitching itself back together. The Bobcats had led her to a rescue, not just the fawn, but herself. Now with Eli here, it felt like the land was weaving them all into its wildlife tapestry. But why had the Bobcats stayed so close tonight? Morning brought a chill, and the barn was too quiet. Martha stepped outside, her breath catching. The Bobcats weren't on the fence or in the barn. The fields stretched empty, but a single paw print pressed deep into the mud glinted in the frost. Where had they gone, and what were they preparing her for? Spring crept in, softening the frost that had clung to Martha's fields. The barn, once a hollow shell, hummed with new purpose as Eli hammered boards and cleared old hay. Martha watched him work, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The Bobcats, those wild animals that had sparked this heartwarming story, were gone. No rustle in the straw, no glint of eyes at dusk. The silence they left wasn't heavy, it was gentle, like a page turning. Yet Martha felt their absence like a bruise. One morning she found a mark in the dirt by the barn, a shallow dip, as if something had curled up one last time. She knelt, tracing it with her fingers. Tears came, not from grief, but from release. For years, she'd carried guilt like a stone, blaming herself for Eli's leaving, for her husband's death. Now, she let it go. The Bobcats had led her to a rescue, not just of a fawn or her son, but of her own spirit. Eli joined her, his boots scuffing the earth. "You okay, Ma?" he asked. She nodded, pointing to the mark. "They were here for a reason," she said. Together, they planted seeds in the fields, the land waking under their hands. The farm felt alive again, stitched into the wildlife around it. Martha wondered if the Bobcats had been more than animals, maybe messengers guiding her back to herself. Months passed, and the fields bloomed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Martha froze on the porch. A shadow moved at the edge of the field, a bobcat, sleek and alone. Her breath caught. It wasn't one of the three. This one was smaller, a female, with two tiny cubs trailing her. She paused, meeting Martha's gaze, then nudged her cubs toward the forest. It felt like a gift, a final chapter in their story. The cubs tumbled playfully, unaware of the weight of that moment. Martha smiled, her heart full. The Bobcats had returned not to stay, but to pass the torch. As the cubs vanished into the trees, a question lingered. What new stories would this land hold, and who would be its next guardians? What makes a wild animal choose to protect instead of hunt? This heartwarming story of three bobcats and a lonely farm leaves us wondering, are we ever truly alone, or is nature always weaving connections we can't see? Martha's rescue wasn't just about a fawn or her son, it was about finding her place in the wildlife around her. Those bobcats, with their silent wisdom, turned a broken woman into a guardian of the land. Have you ever felt a bond with something wild, something that changed you? Share your story below, we're all ears. And what do you think? Will those cubs carry on their mother's legacy? If you believe in the unspoken ties between humans and wild animals, hit subscribe. These stories of hope, healing, and transformation need to be heard. Keep watching for more tales that remind us how the wild can mend our hearts.